Cool. We are waiting for the progress bar. All right, we are live. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for coming tonight for Building Trust and Creating Value with Your Brand, hosted by Jack with Margot over our guest. I'm Grace. I founded Design Buddies back in April 2020, and I've seen it grow to over 18,000 members. And full-time, I'm a designer in electronic arts, so I love design, basically live, breathe design. For the format of this event, we'll have Jack hosting. Jack is actually our new admin, our content lead, one of our content leads along with Sarah for Design Buddy. So we're super excited to have him on for our first event here. And we'll have Jack do a fireside chat style chat with Margot. And you'll get a chance to let us know your questions via Slido and upvote questions as well, submitted by buddies. We'll also have a networking sheet shared in the chat where you can input any links you want to connect with your fellow buddies. And we'll also have a group photo at the end as well, so make sure to stay towards the end. And if you really enjoy what you're hearing tonight, we would really appreciate if you could share about this event on social media, like on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and tag us and Margot. And yeah, with that said, Jack, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Grace. And thank you, Margot, for being with us tonight. It's going to be a really great talk. I love Trustworthy, so it's really awesome that everyone's here to discuss it and kind of listen in on your book. Really exciting stuff. Like Grace said, I'm Jack, and I'm really excited for you all to be here with our talk with Margot. And we'll be talking brands, content strategy, all sorts of good stuff that's really covered eloquently in her new book, Trustworthy. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Margot. Margot is a prominent voice in the content world, having taught and spoken on content strategy at design conferences, workshops, and keynote events for more than a decade. She has worked as a content strategist for more than 20 years, consulting with clients in a wide range of industries from software as a service to footwear tech to 401ks. She's the author of Content Strategy at Work, which I will definitely be reading next, having now read Trustworthy. And of course, Trustworthy is what we will be discussing today, how the smartest brands beat cynicism and bridge the trust gap. Margot is a designer of content, and you can find her now with her new company at Appropriate Inc. She's an amazing author, a brand boss, marketing master, other great alliterations. Margot, thanks for joining us today. Hope that wasn't too corny with the alliteration.
Oh, that's cool. I'm always down for more alliteration. Always alliteration.
Awesome. So before we get into it, I'm just going to say, if anyone who's a part of the audience today has any questions or comments, please share them in the chat and we will open the floor towards the end of the event for audience questions. I would also like to mention that Booksmith will be offering free shipping on Trustworthy for Bay Area folks if you purchase from them, and they're a San Francisco local bookseller. So really cool. Thank you, Booksmith. They will be linked in the chat along with other booksellers like Amazon, which I believe is $5 off right now if you guys are interested. So definitely check that out. And without further ado, let's get started. It would be great, I think, Margot, if you could just share a bit on your background leading up to Trustworthy.
Sure. Like you said, I've been working as a content strategist for about 20 years. Before that, my background is actually, I've got my BFA in graphic design and communication design and anthropology. And I graduated college, I guess sort of at like the height of the .com boom, right before the bust. And at the time, I was looking at different web agencies as we were starting to kind of make the modern web, and interviewing around it at like some of the bigger ones like Razorfish and Sapient. And at the time, the questions that I was asking, even though I was coming at it from a background in design, they were more around communication goals and messaging and how we make sure that brands are communicating appropriately for their different target audiences. And finally, in the course of one interview, the person that I was speaking with said, "Those are great questions, but those aren't the questions that we ask here on our team. You should go talk to the folks in content strategy." And that was kind of my introduction to it. And I ended up joining the content strategy team as coming in there as a designer and kind of learning from the ground up. And at the time, it was kind of I would say glorified technical writing and copywriting, building on the tradition of technical writing. And right when companies were looking to make that move, or hoping to make that move, I guess, from brochureware to something that was more around user-centered design. And we were starting to talk about user-centered design and user experience design. And I really learned on the job from wonderful, wonderful mentors. And after kind of like the dot-com boom and bust, I ended up going in-house for about a year. I spent a year at Timberland in-house, working with some of their corporate social responsibility content and design. And then joined a couple of mid-size agencies a few years after that, where they brought me in to help them start their content strategy teams, because finally more and more kind of smaller companies were starting to get this, starting to ask about it. So they wondered, how do we sell it? How do we package it? How do we market it alongside design and information architecture? We were starting to get that idea of sort of that three-legged stool of user experience design. And then I went out on my own and formed Appropriate Inc. in 2010. And then you mentioned Content Strategy at Work. I published that in 2012 with Morgan Kaufman. And then since then, I've kind of focused my practice around brand-driven content strategy. So looking at how it used to be that organizations sort of said what they wanted to on the web, didn't really think about the needs of their target audience and sort of the content types and informational needs that they had. And then with the rise of user experience design, we kind of dragged the pendulum all the way in the other direction to say, all right, well, what do we do if we really just want to focus on the needs of our audience, the needs of our users? And I saw how in that context, there were some companies within certain industries that were kind of losing themselves, losing what made them distinct. So I've tried to kind of bring the pendulum back to the middle to say, how do we help organizations establish their communication goals so they know what makes them unique, and figure out, do they want to lead with innovation or responsibility or being trustworthy, or is it more about being creative and scrappy and witty? And then let's make all of our design and content decisions verbally and visually so that we offer a consistent user experience based on that. And that's led me to focus on brand-driven content strategy, using Brand Sort, another tool that I developed there. And then over the past few years, I've also focused on other types of user experiences, like what happens when we design to control more of the pace in user experience, and slower content strategy, slower experiences. And then most recently, what do we do about bringing more trust into experiences? Because I don't know if you've noticed this, but over the past few years, cynicism has kind of grown and exploded. A lot of people have been affected by gaslighting that has caused them to doubt the evidence of their own eyes and their own ability to make good decisions based on the information they have. And I think there's a real opportunity now for businesses to step up, for designers and writers and people that are creative directors and in professional communications to step into that space and say, how can we support people to feel good about the decisions they make so that they can make good decisions and then feel good about the decisions that they make? How do we support them so that they can feel more confident in their own ability to do research and gain knowledge and hold themselves open to new information and not just be walled off to new ideas? And I think there's an opportunity for us to have those conversations, make those changes in maybe the organizations that we support, so that our audiences can kind of regain some confidence, regain a sense of empowerment and trust to bring into all their other interactions. So that's kind of the past 20 years and how I got to this focus today.
Yeah, awesome. And I think that leads me to a really kind of poignant point about trustworthy that stood out to me really right from the get-go. But before I kind of get into that, I think something that's just really attractive about the design field in general is this idea, beyond just you using your creativity to make something look good. I think what really resonates with a lot of people is this idea of taking their creativity to solve some problem or create some measurable impact. And so with that in the back of our mind, you have this very first sentence of your book that's, I don't trust you. And you go on to elaborate how we're living in this time that you just spoke of kind of heightened distrust, misinformation, or uncertainty in in society. And we have this thought in the back of our heads that, maybe what we're being told or shown isn't quite the real deal. it's not something we might trust from the get-go. And this is from perceptions in big brand advertisements to something like questioning whether the graphics we see in a video game trailer are what we're going to get when the game is delivered, you know? And so with that in mind, to have this foundation in Trustworthy of rebuilding trust, or even just building trust again in society, whether you're creating design solutions in government or public health or media, advertisements, tech, your own brand. I mean, I could go on, and how rebuilding this trust really means empowering your audience, and how this translates not only to better business, which is really impactful in itself, but also has this kind of lasting positive impact in society as well. I think that's something that will really resonate in the same way it did with me, with everyone here tonight. Because as designers, I think at the end of the day, we just want to make the world a bit better. And of course, that doesn't mean dedicating your life to some kind of humanitarian effort, but even from just designing a feature in a video game that will be more fun, or doing some kind of promotional work that's more accessible and clear. I think those things certainly contribute to having a positive impact in society. So really, go ahead, please.
I was just going to interject. I think for so many of us that get into design and approach it as design as problem solving, not just kind of aesthetics, because maybe that's really how we differentiate art from design, when we have that purpose and communication goals with our audience. But I think when we get into design as problem solving, to design, to be a designer, is an act of optimism. It's saying the way things are now is not enough, whether it's the way a button is designed, the call to action on that button, the way a system is designed, the way a healthcare system is designed, the way we deliver healthcare services. If you get more into like the area of service design, I think to look at those things and say, the way we're doing it now is not enough, but we can do better. Let's make it better. That is such an act of optimism. And I think, as you said, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, to bring that sort of mindset to it of really ambition, unbridled ambition, of saying where I am now, what my company is doing now is not enough. We're not doing enough for our users. We're not making things easy enough for them. Let's do it better. That's such an act of optimism. And I think that's a wonderful thing that we can offer.
Yeah, that sentiment is definitely at the heart of Trustworthy. And so that leads me to just questioning why it's important to empower our audience, how trust and empowerment go hand in hand, and frankly, just how you were able to be so timely with Trustworthy.
Well, I can tell you, this is something that I've been digging into and researching for about 5 or 6 years now. I spoke on the topic at South by Southwest, I think in 2017. So that's 4 years ago. And then over the past few years, I've been continuing to research the topic. And when I first approached it, it was with a mindset of saying, okay, I see that there's a problem going on in the world of politics and media that covers politics, where it seems like politicians are able to lie. They're able to play fast and loose with the truth. And the media that used to previously hold them to task and take them to account, they're not doing that anymore. And I see how people in response have grown more cynical. They approach politicians and politics and say, well, everybody lies. They're all out to get you. Everybody's out to make a buck. It doesn't matter. And I wondered, did that matter? Did it matter to my typical audience? Because I don't usually focus on content strategy and design in the political system or even in media and publishing. Like, most of my clients are in retail and higher ed and financial services and some pharmaceutical companies. And I wondered, would this matter to them? And as it turns out, it does. This issue of cynicism, where people engage with, maybe it's marketing messages, or if you're trying to persuade an audience and your audience just looks at that and says, yeah, I don't believe you, you're just trying to sell something. That's an issue that undermines every organization in every industry that is attempting to sell or persuade, or even try to offer their audience something that will help them help themselves. Like if you work in government services or something like that. So I wanted to dig in and see, like, what were the effects of it? And then also, was there anybody that was kind of beating this issue, that was able to look at this problem of cynicism and declining trust and kind of rise above it? And those are the stories that I collected in Trustworthy. I interviewed dozens of brands, dozens of creative directors and content strategists and interaction designers to learn what was working for them, what were the common patterns, and what we could learn from them to see, was there kind of any sort of common theme across their work and their organizations. And that's the framework that I present in Trustworthy, that sort of 3-part framework. Because to get it that first question you asked around, well, why should we empower our users? That was kind of one of the big themes that I discovered in talking with those different brands and creative directors and designers, was that the organizations that worked to not just scream at their users, to not just tell them, we're your only source of truth, don't listen to any of our competitors, but the ones that said to their audiences, here's what we can tell you, but let's also gather information from maybe other organizations. You should know what else is being discussed on this topic. Let's empower you with information. The organizations that took that kind of approach seem to rise to the top. And we could measure that in terms of customer loyalty, their kind of broader following, how they were expanding their target audience, even as an economy was contracting. And like one of the brands that I profiled, America's Test Kitchen, you might know them as, they're an amazing kind of like publisher in the cooking space. They have the Cook's Illustrated magazine, Cook's Country. They publish something like a dozen different cookbooks every year. There's also an online cooking school and different cooking shows. And they're known for not having just like one single famous chef at the helm, but rather really, really presenting the science of cooking and all of their different test results. So they might say, we discovered a better way to bake bread at home because we tried 80 different recipes. Here is what we learned. And it's this idea of, we're going to present you with this enormous volume of content so that you can learn from our mistakes. We're going to present it in a voice that is at an appropriate level of detail, using a level of jargon that you may already understand and will help you learn new terms. And then also with a degree of vulnerability to say, we messed up a few times in some of these recipes, and here's what we learned from those mistakes. That combination of voice and volume and vulnerability played out through so many examples. And what I learned in that initial conversation with America's Test Kitchen with Steve Bishop, their chief creative officer, he said it simply comes down to, we want to make people successful in the kitchen. Whether you're a novice cook and you just realized, oh, yikes, it's my turn to make dinner for my roommates. What do I have in the fridge and what can I make with it? Or you're a more savvy chef and you're like, yes, I am making something new for Thanksgiving dinner this year. And I'm always very proud of what I make. We want to meet people where they are and empower them, because success breeds confidence. And that idea that if you are successful, if the brand is empowering you to be successful, you will feel more confident. That was a common thread through every example, through every interview. And I love that it's sort of this 2-part kind of confidence. Like, you feel more confident in yourself, in that case as a chef, but also then more confident in the brand that enabled you to feel that way. And I saw that in examples from Crutchfield Electronics, from Old Navy, from the British government, the British National Health Service, clinicaltrials.gov in our country, even talking with and looking at kind of examples from Zoom, if we want to talk about it and be that meta, but looking at all of that idea that success breeds confidence, that's about empowering people. And when they can better trust themselves, then they have more trust in the organizations that got them there.
Well, you have just hit so eloquently on like everything that we will be that I'll be asking you momentarily. But I think that's a perfect spot to just kind of break down the framework that you talk about. That's the heart of Trustworthy, which is this voice, volume, and vulnerability. So if you could just go one by one through these and kind of explain what they are and kind of why you found these 3 elements as the most important.
Sure. And I think that you may hear in this how some of it relates to my kind of dual and maybe dueling background as a designer and a content person. So voice, the first part of that framework, that refers to how we communicate consistently in a consistent and familiar language, visually and verbally. So when people get to know a brand, they get to know their illustration style and photography style, how they lay out diagrams. If you're a brand that prioritizes being simple, maybe your diagrams are not so cluttered. You're more of like an IKEA approach. And whereas if you're a brand that maybe prioritizes taking a more comprehensive approach to things, maybe your illustrations are that much more detailed. Your photo galleries contain 50 images instead of just like 2. And your sentences are that much longer. People get to know that kind of voice about you. And the point that I make in the section on voice is that when brands change that up, because maybe they're rolling out a new product or somebody just decides that now in the middle of a pandemic, when there's so much upheaval, let's update the homepage. Let's completely throw everything away that people thought they knew about us. That's a problem. People grow to trust your voice. And when you change it visually or verbally, that's not great. And I share some examples from organizations that I feel like do it right. We hear stories from early Banana Republic, pre the Gap acquisition, as well as MailChimp, to hear how they've evolved their voice over time. In the second section on volume, volume refers to how much you say, again, visually and verbally, in terms of length and level of detail. And I share examples to basically say that there is no one right length for a blog post. There's no one right number of images in an image gallery, but rather you know that you've written enough, you know you've said enough or explained enough when your audience is able to make good decisions and feel good about the decisions they make. And that's something that you can measure through user research, through testing in the lab, and also looking at things like the rate of product returns. When people feel comfortable with a decision, that's when they feel like, okay, I can put this product in my cart, and when it arrives, no matter the price on it, I feel good that I made the right decision. Maybe I'll even tell my friends that I'm proud of the research that I did. I feel confident in this decision. We hear about that with examples, again, from America's Test Kitchen with the volume that they publish, Crutchfield Electronics, but then also contrast that with stories from gov.uk. Just to share kind of a quick anecdote on that. When I was talking with their team around how they decide how much content to publish, they were talking about it from the perspective of the British government. There's a lot that they offer their citizens, and it used to come through in 75,000 web pages that you can bet were not updated regularly or consistently. And it was across something like 9 different websites. And people would frequently click among them to figure out if they had the right answers around paying VAT or applying for different government benefits. And then frequently they would give up and instead turn to see what was written in The Guardian, the newspaper, about it instead. That's not great if you work for government. So they adopted a mindset and sort of a new mantra that government would only publish information on the things that only government should publish information. So it used to be that if you were, I don't know, maybe starting up with like beekeeping and you lived in Britain, you could turn to gov.uk to find out, well, what different species of bees would do well in different parts of the country? How do you build a hive? How many hives should you have? All things that are great topics that should probably come from an agricultural organization, not the government. So they stripped back their content with that kind of new mindset, and they went from 75,000 pages down to 3,000 pages. That was an amazing effect of their content audit, and it made the content that much more sustainable for the people that had to maintain it. Also that much more cohesive and consistent for their end users. And they got back a lot of feedback around that in their testing too. So we hear a good bit about like how much is the right volume of content and how you can determine that for your brand. And then the third section, invulnerability, I talk about it from the perspective of when brands are looking to build trust, both after they've just messed up in wild and horrible ways, when either the CEO has done something stupid or the organization has been caught doing something that just runs amok of our social ethics, as well as what organizations do to bring their audiences closer when they want to make their values visible and prototype in public and maybe respond to different social issues and say, Yeah, Me Too or Black Lives Matter or other issues around diversity and inclusion and equity, we think those things matter too. We want to let you know that about us, that we think those things are important. And we hear tales of how sometimes organizations lose customers when they make their values visible, but then also how they expand their target audiences by acting as a beacon, by saying, this is who we are, this is how we are. If you're like us too, maybe you want to come over here as a potential employee or a potential customer as well. And there I interviewed folks at Penzeys Spices, a spice retailer in the Midwest that came out strong against the former administration's immigration policies, because they said, yeah, look, cooking is an act of love. We believe that immigration matters and makes America great. And the current administration, the last administration, their policies and beliefs aren't our beliefs. And before you go and say, hey, stay in your lane there, cinnamon boy, you should know this is our lane, because cooking, especially the recipes that we all love here in America, most of them tell the story of immigration. They came here thanks to immigrants. So many of the spices we sell also come from far outside of our country's borders. So we support immigration. And when Bill Penzy, the CEO of Penzeys Spices, took to Facebook with that message, I think back in 2016, they attracted a lot of headlines. They lost a lot of customers. But then what happened is they actually expanded who could be their customer. Suddenly they were getting orders from people that they themselves didn't cook, but they were like, well, I need to buy Christmas and Hanukkah presents and whatnot coming up for people in my family that do love to cook. I'm going to buy them spices this year because I want to support this company. And so we talk a lot in that section. I talk a lot about what it means for organizations to make their values visible, and what happens if they make their values visible and kind of put a stake in the ground around a social issue, only to discover that that external problem is also an internal problem that they need to address. So yeah, that's basically the framework of the book. I talk about voice, volume, and vulnerability, what we can learn from different organizations that do well in those areas to build trust, and then how you can break it down no matter the size of your organization, no matter the industry in which you operate, and really no matter your role, whether you're a junior designer or a creative director or a social media person or a writer or a content strategist or a project manager, kind of overseeing all of it, how this is work that we can do, and this is work that we should do.
Yeah, that is awesome, because that goes right into what I wanted to ask you next, which is, beyond these more established companies like MailChimp, Zoom, America's Test Kitchen, who else can this book really be for? And you kind of just answered the question. I think it can be for anyone really trying to get this message across. But how can they kind of take this actionable framework in, if they're just starting their design journeys or just starting creating their brands? How might someone, who might not have a background in brand communication or content strategy really effectively use this framework to maybe even something as simple as just present themselves as a stronger applicant for a particular design role, or, bring it to a new organization?
I think it's always good when you're working with a new client, or maybe if you're at a startup, or if you're interviewing with an organization, the way you frame your work, the way you talk about what influenced your decisions, I think can matter as much as the decisions themselves. And sometimes it means when you're presenting work in your portfolio to say, this is what I've been continuing to learn. So if I was going to pursue this project further, I would also bring in this kind of thinking. And I think even to say that this is part of my framework, kind of like this is part of my toolkit, can be really useful, because it tells other people with whom you're working or hope to work that these are the values that you bring to it. And in some cases, it might be the first time that they're hearing it. So it's an opportunity to enlighten them as well. And I think that when you are starting a new project, to approach it with that question of both, well, what are we trying to accomplish for the company, but also what are we trying to accomplish for our users, and what are we trying to accomplish for society? That's what allows you to have that broader conversation, to say, all right, maybe we're thinking about doing a website overhaul or redesign. Maybe we should put the brakes on this and think more strategically about just changing certain elements in over like the next month, and then wait a little bit and roll out other changes so that it's not such a kind of cataclysmic big deal change to our audience. Or maybe we look at ways to streamline our communication so that it can be more consistent, or even just bring more vulnerability into it by looking at, well, how many times are we kind of speaking in the first person? How many times are our images showing people kind of at work engaging with each other, or are we breaking the fourth wall to look directly at our users, at our audience through our imagery?
Yeah, well said. So I think now would be a great time to kind of dive a little deeper into this 3V framework. So when we're talking about voice and we're talking about the importance of your brand's personality, both in its kind of visual and verbal communication, one of my favorite case studies that you bring up is with MailChimp and how its messaging evolved over time as their company and audience grew, and importantly, kind of why it evolved, which is, spoiler alert, to empower their audience as it became larger and still feel familiar, still have that same kind of brand appeal. And in Trustworthy, it seems as though they attribute a lot of this success that they have to a culture that they kind of cultivated with their employees first. And you go on to say, efficient and satisfying opportunities for contribution increase employees' loyalty and sense of purpose. And they also allow for more people to be engaged with the brand as it evolves. And I think this kind of translates to customers as well. So I'm wondering how you think through your brand's voice, you can empower your customers or your audience to feel like they aren't just buying a product or service from you, but rather really like being a part of a community.
Sure. So I want to talk about MailChimp from a few different angles, because like what you just cited from Trustworthy, I think is what a lot of organizations can embrace. MailChimp has always had this kind of learning and leadership and kind of supportive culture internally and externally, where they do a lot to promote from within, as well as a lot to promote the ideas of different employees from within wherever in the organization. And then they've also kind of taken that approach and helped to document and standardize and share it with the world, definitely with their customers. And we see that with like their voice and tone guidelines that they published publicly to say, we developed this for our own internal use, but look, this is a good example that might be useful for other organizations that are creating editorial style guidelines. They're doing the same thing around some of like their design style guidelines too, to let their work serve as an external model for other organizations, as well as for their customer organizations. And that idea of celebrating and using their own work as a model, I think serves their organization well. And then they've done a lot to highlight the work of different organizations, whether it's through their annual report or different efforts to spotlight what customers are doing, and then demonstrate how you can support and buy from those other small businesses. It definitely keeps them in touch with their roots, which was as a small business that started to serve other small businesses, primarily around email marketing. And now we know that they're no longer a small business. It's something like 60% of the world's email marketing goes through MailChimp. Now they also do more than just email marketing. There's also e-commerce and other services. So they've grown, but they still always work to champion the work of other people around them, the work of other brands that are their customers that they support. But I also want to talk about over the past, I guess, month or so, they've been in the headlines a little bit as some former employees have come forward to say, I was not always treated fairly or promoted appropriately or compensated appropriately. And yet you say that equity matters here. And I think they're doing a good job. And I support what they are doing to address both what was a private personnel matter, but also to stop and say, well, wait, we have our vision of how we like to think of ourselves as an organization. We know our North Star based on kind of our mission and our vision and values and what we publish about our organization. But something has broken here. We know what our culture aspires to be, But if people are feeling disenfranchised, or like their managers aren't hearing them, or like we're not doing a good job of treating everyone fairly, something has broken down in terms of our internal communication, in terms of how we set and then standardize policy for people. And I think they're doing a good job now of addressing that. And I think this gets into a little bit of that vulnerability section around organizations that mess up and then have to kind of prototype in public and evolve in public. I think that's how they gain greater trust. That's how they regain trust, to say, yeah, we think we messed up in something. We acknowledge that there's a problem. How are we going to address it? And how can our audiences internally and externally hold us accountable so that things do improve here? And I'm excited to see that evolution from them, because I think that they do have a strong culture. But like any organization that has grown over time, sometimes you grow so quickly that you forget to maintain certain aspects of that culture. Maybe they focused too much on product and not enough on ensuring the diversity of team members that were supporting a particular product. Now is the opportunity for them to say, we recognize this is a problem and we want to do something about it. Here's what we're going to do about it. So I think that while I write about MailChimp in primarily that voice section of the book around that part of the framework, I'm excited to see what they will offer us now as an example in vulnerability too.
That's something that I love about these 3 V's too, how closely they're all kind of tied in together and interconnected. So that's a great point as well. Moving on to volume, and that's kind of the focus on how much your brand communicates and how often. And I think you already made this statement, but I'm just going to reiterate it because this is something that stood out to me, that to facilitate success is to breed confidence regardless of platform. And I think that really kind of gets into one of the main points of trustworthy, which we'll touch back on a bit later, but that this problem of distrust and uncertainty that we have is really a problem for everyone and applicable to all industries. And so when you're able to facilitate success and breed confidence, it's almost a solution to that. And so you bring up this point when speaking to America's Test Kitchen, and how they empower their audience to have fun with cooking and learn recipes rather than just kind of mechanically following them or reading a list. And so they do this really well, again, with their voice of the interconnection there, but the volume of content provided as well. And I'm really interested in how one can specifically kind of facilitate this kind of success with the volume or amount of content your brand publishes. I think this would be a great time to talk about the gov.uk example, or even also, I saw a question earlier that I'm just going to plug in right here, which was about if you're starting your brand today in this age of search engine optimization and kind of like findability, wouldn't it make sense to kind of focus on, releasing lots of content so you're able to be found more quickly than maybe later on narrowing down your focus of how often you communicate and what kind of like quality of content that is. So if you could maybe talk about the gov.uk example there and then maybe address that, I think that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, because I think that's been a struggle, I think, and maybe a misconception perpetuated in the content marketing community that more content is better. And I think what we've come to learn, certainly what I learned in speaking with different brands, is that we know it takes a certain amount of content to enable people, to help people feel confident. But more content is not always better content. And I would never suggest that you should compromise quality for quantity. And I think, yes, you need a certain amount of content just to be found by search engines. If the tree falls in the woods and nobody's around to hear it or find it on Google, we don't know because it wasn't cataloged by search engines. Mm-hmm. But that said, I think that the amount of content we need, there should never be a push. Organizations should never push to gotta get out another blog post, gotta meet the needs of the editorial calendar if it means that we are compromising on quality, or if people are rushing, or if that you're producing content that is inconsistent. And I think gov.uk is a perfect example of that, where they were producing so much content, 75,000 pages to be maintained by a distributed team of people. That's a lot, and that's a lot of opportunity for inconsistency, especially if everybody's writing in a slightly different voice and there are no consistent editorial standards, or if every designer is kind of working to different standards and they don't yet have a kind of an object library that they're able to pull from. That's a problem for both internal content creators, by which I mean both designers and developers and writers, as well as external content consumers, because even just looking internally in an organization, if people are maybe keen to contribute to your blog, or maybe in your organization, like you mentioned in the context of a brand just starting out, maybe there is somebody that loves to blog or loves to tweet. So you end up tweeting a whole lot and blogging a whole lot. But what if that's not where your audience is? Or what if the subjects and the topics that you're addressing aren't really relevant to your brand, or even undermine the broader proposition of your brand? That's a problem. It's far better to first know what you stand for. That idea, I think it was like carved over the entrance to the temple in Delphi, Nati Sotum, know thyself. Know what your brand stands for first. Is it that you lead with innovation? Is it that you lead with making things simple for people, or being creative and or empowering them? Know what those things are so that you can determine, well, what should you be talking about, and at what frequency? And I think knowing that helps to guide the internal content creation process, because that way people aren't just contributing to a lot of activity without ensuring that that activity is actually progress. They're also not constantly being smacked down by the legal team or an editor saying, that's great, but the tone is all wrong, or we could never use that word, or that's just not our imagery style. And that's the kind of problem that you encounter when you focus on just creating to kind of feed the content beast or address issues of platform proliferation without first thinking, well, what should we be saying? Why? And where? Because if the answer to all of those things is everywhere, all the time, all the things, that's a problem for people internally and externally.
Yeah, certainly. And then finally, with vulnerability, which is, your willingness to own up to mistakes, but beyond that as well, kind of your response to these crazy social events that happen. I'm just wondering, it's such a difficult topic for brands, because maybe they feel if they go out on a limb, they might lose customers. But you so eloquently bring up these case studies about different companies who have also gained customers, and in fact a more loyal customer base, from presenting their views around these topics, or how they respond in public to some kind of mistake that they've made. And I'm just wondering, how can being vulnerable foster empowerment for your audience, whether it's building a closer community or just holding your brand or yourself accountable? And kind of how does this empowerment result in sometimes a better business, or even possibly a better product? I think Zoom would be a meta fun case study to kind of talk about here.
Yeah. So just to go into detail on Zoom then. So as everyone here likely remembers, because the timeline here is pretty short, a year ago now, as kind of the pandemic had reached pandemic proportions and folks were all working from home and most schools had shut down, Zoom was in quite a tizzy. They were in quite a state, because just some 4 or 5 months prior, so thinking back to like November, December of 2019, kind of in those sort of sunlit glory days, they had maybe, I think it was something like 10 million daily business users. and primarily business users, but 10 million daily users. So they were people that were primarily logging in from work with the support of an IT team that was telling them things like, make sure you enable security for that meeting and maybe think about setting a password for it, stuff like that. The IT teams are good at saying. But within just a few months, so by March of last year, so a year ago, they had jumped from 10 million daily users to 200 million daily users. And something like 90,000 schools across 20 countries were suddenly using the platform. So you had preschool teachers and college professors and book clubs that were meeting on Zoom, as well as business users now working from home. And people were also having like family dinners and happy hours and birthday parties on Zoom. Lots of people using it in lots of different ways, most of whom didn't have an IT team telling them, set a password, set maybe a waiting room on that meeting. Don't just open it up to everyone. Otherwise, you're going to have to deal with Zoom bombers. And that's exactly what happened. Suddenly, there were a lot of issues because people were saying like, wait, who are all these people? And what are all these smutty images I'm seeing in my preschool classroom? And it was a problem. And the CEO of Zoom, Eric Yuan, he could have very easily said, not our problem, or you're doing it wrong. But he didn't. In early April of last year, he published a blog post, sort of this open response to the problems. First saying, thank you. Thank you for noticing what's been going on, people that have called out this issue. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you're having this kind of experience. And he apologized in the first person singular. He said, I'm sorry. Here's what we're going to do about it. And then he gave credit to his team, the team of engineers. And he said, we're addressing these problems in these ways. We thank the journalists and the customers that have raised some big issues to us. And they are things that we should have caught, that we should have known about earlier. Here's what we're going to do about it. And here's what you can expect from us, how you can hold us accountable. So first, we're going to shift all of our engineering resources away from new features. We're going to enact a feature freeze and instead look at issues of security and privacy. And then you can also expect to hear from me weekly. We'll be publishing a transparency report and submitting to third-party auditing as well. And it was an appropriately detailed blog post. And by appropriately detailed, I mean there was a large volume of technical information in there that he broke down without jargon so that his audience, and a show of respect for his audience, they could understand what was going on. So the level of information, the level of detail, the amount of information that he provided instead of just lip service was empowering to his audience. And that kind of vulnerability of starting with an apology that acknowledged the problem and then offering an appropriate level of detail to address what had happened and what they would do about it, and then an investment in accountability of saying, here's what you can expect and at what timeline, and here's how you can hold me accountable for it. That worked to instill so much trust in a point of vulnerability, in a point where they could have easily said like, nothing is working as it should, and sorry. They have treated it really with the appropriate level of respect to build and maintain rapport with their audience. And I think it was by empowering them with information so that people could understand and feel savvy about it, feel more confident themselves that they knew where Zoom was going. That's what allowed them to maintain the confidence and trust of their audience. And yeah, there are some businesses that have switched to like Microsoft Teams or have said that maybe WebEx is a better solution for them. But by and large, Zoom has done really well because they've done a lot to respect their product, but also respect their audience. And I think by pulling their audience closer, by pulling their critics closer and saying, we want you to know what happened here and what we're going to do about it, it was such a wonderful model of an authentic and an elegant apology to say, this is what happened. here's what we're going to do about it, and here's how you can hold us accountable. And I think that it's such a wonderful model for so many other businesses. And some of the others that I talk about in that section, like TED, when they had to respond to critics calling out the quality of some of their content, and if it was still timely and relevant, they adopted that same approach to address it, acknowledge it directly, pull their critics closer to say, all right, well, let's work through this together. Let's prototype in public and bring your feedback into it. By empowering their critics with more insight, so that the scientists that were calling out the quality of some of their videos could kind of see the issues that they were trying to wrestle with and wrangle, it helped them transform some of their loudest, most vociferous critics into their biggest champions that now felt invested in their success. And I think that that's something that any organization smaller than TED can also learn. Any brand smaller than TED can also learn that by bringing your critics closer, that's what allows them to kind of be a part of your struggle and see what you're doing to improve things so that they can feel invested in that solution and trumpet it.
Amazing. And I have so many more questions, but we're running out of time here. And we have a lot of audience questions submitted from signups. But I want to first get to what Randy submitted in the chat, which was he would be interested to hear some of this, I think, 3V framework geared more towards freelancers versus these bigger organizations. So if you could quickly touch on that, then we'll move on to the next one really quick.
Sure. Well, I think I don't know if Randy can unmute himself, and I'm curious, what sort of freelancer are you? Can you give me a sense of the type of clients you might work with or their scale?
I could work with various different sizes. I do UX audits or inspections, going through trying to make sure that websites are as usable as they would like them to be. And I try to do that from an outside point of view, because when you see the same website every day, you get blinded to what's really going on there. I also have my own UX stars community, but on the business end, I have these UX inspections that I do, and really it could be any size of company.
Yeah, so I think that in so much of the work that we do, and I think certainly in that kind of research space, it can be tempting to hide some of the detail in jargon, to kind of baffle our clients with bull and baloney around this, because that's kind of our secret sauce, I guess, and that's what we want them to pay us for. But I do think that the work that we can do to educate people along the way, to maybe clarify different aspects of your work in a voice that takes them from maybe what they currently know or beliefs they currently have to where you want them to go, to kind of help them ladder up their knowledge and their savvy about the work, that can sometimes build more trust in you as a brand, so that they can both trust and feel knowledgeable about their kind of exposure to the work, as well as have even greater trust in that, yes, they want to bring you in to do that work because it's just too much for them. I think as far as the volume of information that you offer them too, there are some cases I felt like when I'm maybe kind of presenting a deliverable to a client, where I want them to see that the complexity that went into certain decisions that may then seem very simple. So maybe if I'm presenting a content audit, yeah, I want them to see a screenshot of the thousands of lines in it. I want them to see like the level of detail into which we were digging, so they know that that level of detail is there. They know that we've done due diligence, but they don't have to worry about it. And I think that's something that I certainly saw at play with America's Test Kitchen and with Crutchfield and so many other brands that kind of have that volume of detail that they offer their users, that some people, they want to read through it. They want that comprehensive dig. But other people say, I'm glad you've done that research. Just now tell me what crock pot I need to buy, or tell me what camera lens is going to be right for me. And I think that the same applies in a lot of our work, where sometimes clients just want the executive summary. I still want them to know the depth of knowledge, the depth of research that kind of fuels that executive summary, that single top line statement. And I think as far as like bringing vulnerability into our work, I think that we can learn a lot from how how even brands on Kickstarter have adopted a tone that, and I think the nature of the Kickstarter platform definitely feeds into this, of kind of coming down to the level of our audiences and explain to them what's going on as it's going on. When we encounter different challenges, we shouldn't put up like the false front and give them the false bravado that yes, everything is fine. I think that's a message that many people took from brands in kind of like the 80s and early 90s, where so many people wore big shoulder pads. And I think a lot of organizations wore big shoulder pads too, to kind of make themselves seem bigger than they were. And if you look at so many successful organizations now, they've kind of taken off those metaphorical shoulder pads to say, so here's what we understand about our process. Here's what we're still trying to figure out. We welcome input from our audience to kind of frame it, I guess, in the spirit of Kickstarter. One of the organizations that I looked at was ANSI Labs. They were the designer, a little startup behind the original Fidget Cube. And it was one of those Kickstarters that totally went off the rails. They had many thousands more backers than they ever anticipated. And as a result, when they had problems at scale. First, they realized that they didn't quite understand some of the issues with the manufacturing process. Plastics didn't operate the way they thought they would. I think at one point they had to switch factories as well. They had all these delays in the process. And their backers were getting really, really angry and sending in thousands of emails a day. And they adopted an approach of saying, let us over-inform you. We want you to know what is going on because we don't always know what's going on, but let us tell you what we do know so that you've got our knowns as well as our unknowns and what we're doing to resolve those unknowns. And it was a great lesson in vulnerability so that their audience could kind of come along in the process. And people were still angry. I mean, these products were going to ship as a Christmas stocking stuffer, and they didn't finish shipping until the following April. But as their audience grew more informed about challenges in the manufacturing process and then why there were delays in shipping, people became more sympathetic. And then when they finally got their products, they were stoked. And as a company, they've taken those lessons in around over communicating, addressing the problem head on, acknowledging what's going on, providing frequent updates, speaking in the first person about as they're learning and making new changes. They've taken those lessons to heart in their subsequent releases. And I think that works at any scale, whether you're a freelancer or like a multinational conglomerate.
Awesome. Thank you, Randy, for the question. We are at 7, but if Margot, you're willing to take at least one more question, I think that would be great. We have this one from Jenny, which I think is really great. And she asks, when considering design decisions, in this case, in particular typography, but I'm going to just make it more general and say just design decisions and trustworthiness, how do they kind of relate? How can a design decision like typography choice add or subtract trustworthiness from an article or a site or someone's portfolio or project?
I think so much of trust visually comes through in association and familiarity. So if it's a typeface that you associate with another brand, or maybe a typeface that you associate with the history of that brand, if it harkens you back to a previous product launch and you're already familiar with it, I think that helps to engender trust. And I think that degree of familiarity plays out really visually because we are such visual people that when you see something that you're like, feels vaguely familiar or it hints at something else, you almost feel like you're kind of in on the joke, that you get it, that you understand where this brand is coming from. And I think like for me, looking at, well, I can tell you, like the typeface on the cover of Trustworthy is Benton Modern, I believe it's Benton Modern Condensed. And it was, so Tobias Frere Jones originally designed that for the Boston Globe. And I live in Boston, so it has that kind of familiar tone to me. And it has kind of a higher X height, which to me always seems a little bit not too serious, a little bit more tongue in cheek, even though it's a serif typeface. But it has kind of like nice differentiation between the thicks and thins. So he originally designed it for the Boston Globe. that is a very well-trusted paper. There's a lot of newspapers out there. And in general, the Boston Globe is considered a serious, good paper of record. And he designed it for that. It was based off of a previous version that Morris Fuller Benton, I'm sorry, it was based off of Century that Morris Fuller Benton had designed as an expansion of a typeface that his father, Lynn Boyd Benton, had originally developed back in, like, I think 1892, 1894, something like that. So it's a typeface with history too. Like, Century it's been around for more than a century, but it's the stuff of, like, old school books and all, and it's been used in a lot of newspapers and kind of very respectable publications. It doesn't look like an overly modern typeface, but it's still approachable. It doesn't feel too stuffy and traditional. And when we were developing kind of the overall look and feel and the design of the cover, I knew that was going to be one of the typefaces that would work really well for the message, because it's all about having the visual and verbal being cohesive and kind of operating from the same communication goals and message architecture. And I felt that grounded the message appropriately. It communicated it appropriately. And I hope that when someone picks it up, they don't look at it and think, like, totally in line with the Boston Globe, but rather they look at it and think, yeah, this is approachable. It's serious, it's grounded, it's a real book, but I'm going to be able to dig into it. There's going to be a place for me in this. I will see myself in this and be able to pull stuff from it. And I think that as a typeface, that's what at least Benton Modern Condensed can communicate.
Awesome. I think this would be a great time for us to do our group photo. So Grace, if you'd like to take over for a moment, that'd be great.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the awesome talk, Margaret. I learned a lot about trust and creating content and everything like that too. For our group photo, we're gonna count down to 10. So y'all can also bring a stuffed animal if you want to. I always carry my Pusheen or Lakuma. We always do this. We take a random object or plushie be in our photo if you want. And afterwards, we'll be doing a wave for our Instagram story. And at design.buddies, oh, awesome. Oh, it's the elephant mug. That's so cool.
Yeah. Watch. Hi.
That's awesome. Oh my God. Okay, I'm going to have my bunny, or I'm going to count down 10. After this, we'll be doing a wave. So I'll be filming this for our Instagram story. So you'll be able to see this if you follow us on Instagram. All right, 10, 9, feel free to grab any object you want. 8, 7, I'll take both pages too. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, smile, cheese. All right, feel free to wave, dance, dab. This is just for a random Instagram story where we just hang out and vibe together. Yeah, you can wave, you can dab. I see people like do the wave with the dolphin. Yeah, whatever floats your boat. We can wave your stuffed animal like that. All right, ready, set, go. Hello, buddies. Oh, sorry, my phone was lagging a bit. Hello, buddies. Thank you all for coming to Building Trust and Creating Value with Your Brand by Margot Bloomstein, hosted by our new admin, Jack. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Cool. Thank you all so much for coming. This concludes our event, and this event is actually live streamed on our YouTube channel. So if you head to our YouTube channel, send somewhere in the chat and also on our Discord, you'll be able to find the recordings. I can access it and watch it again anytime you want, or send to your friends, tweet about us, LinkedIn, Instagram, all that jazz. But yeah, have a good night, everyone. Thank you all for coming. And for the host, we'll stay for a few minutes of retro, but thank you all for coming, and I'll stop streaming on YouTube.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.